Hello, my name is Daniel Gordon. I'm a Senior Director of Markets at the UK Competition and Markets Authority, and welcome to our module on working with markets tools. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce this module. This module focuses on the markets regimes of several different competition authorities, including two of the tools the CMA uses to help achieve its general mission to make markets work well for consumers, businesses and the economy. Those tools in particular, specifically market studies and market investigations. This section will give an overview of how we at the CMA utilise our markets tool and associate legal powers from how we select cases through to remedy implementation and any appeals. And finally, we'll share some findings from our recent market studies to highlight how these cases have helped to address harms in specific markets that have required remedial action in the UK. First, identifying markets. Ideas for potential markets cases come from a variety of sources, including our own research, as well as issues that are raised from industry stakeholders, members of parliament or government, other regulators, or consumer organisations. We group these ideas together into a pipeline list. In assessing which of these ideas to take forward, the CMA then applies its prioritization principles. These principles contain four key criteria to assess whether a potential market study or market investigation should be launched. Those are strategic significance, impact, risk, and resources. And further details of those are published on the CMA's web pages. Briefly summarised, impact means the impact on consumers. Risk means legal and reputational risk. And resources means the demands on CMA staffing relative to other issues that the CMA has to look at the time. Strategic significance means considering the CMA's strategic priorities. These are set out in the annual plan that we publish each year. The annual plan for 2021-22 identified 4 themes where the CMA should focus its work, which you can see on the screen now. The CMA will consider all these factors and then determine whether a market study will be launched. Once a market study or a market investigation has been launched, a first step is to identify theories of harm to determine what lines of investigation to pursue. A theory of harm identifies potential problems in the market that could be harming consumers. For example, we might consider whether a market has high barriers to entry or expansion that prevent competing firms from entering, or whether the conduct of firms in a market leads consumers to purchase from an incumbent supplier instead of seeking alternative from other competitors. Once theories of harm have been developed, we will then test them by gathering evidence and information about how the market works and examine the conditions that are causing harms to arise. Evidence gathering and handling is absolutely vital to helping the CMA make informed judgments and decisions when using its markets tools. And the CMA has formal information gathering powers under the Enterprise Act 2002 to help us do this. The evidence gathering process enables the CMA to robustly test our theories of harm, identify and engage with key stakeholders, and to help us determine the correct course for remedial action. We assemble evidence in a wide range of ways. These include issuing questionnaires, formal and informal information requests to specific companies, and sending surveys to a wider set of industry participants as well as to consumers. We may also engage with industry regulators and central government departments.
Most CMA market studies and investigations begin through the pipeline process. The pipeline process involves screening a wide variety of information sources to determine whether a market may not be working well and whether a market study is an appropriate tool for the CMA to use to improve outcomes for consumers. Once identified, the pipeline team will carry out further pipeline research and analysis and produce a proposal for a market study. We set out theories of harm and consider the availability of potential remedies and an assessment of the impact of any work. Proposals for a market study will be assessed against the prioritization principles and shortlisted to be discussed by the CMA's pipeline steering group. The pipeline steering group assesses the relative merits and priorities of potential projects across all of the CMA's tools to ensure the most appropriate use of the CMA's resources. If approved, the CMA will engage in detailed scoping work prior to commencing a market study. Scoping work is essential given the CMA's statutory deadlines, which mean that the CMA must decide on whether it will make a market investigation reference within 6 months of launching the market study. We must publish our final report on the market study and make any recommendations within 12 months from the start of the market study. Scoping work will also include further development of theories of harm, consideration of the products or services to be in scope, and the geographic scope of the study. Once scoping has been completed and approval by the CMA board is received, the preliminary stages of a market study can begin.
Market studies have a statutory timetable, and the formal beginning of a market study occurs upon the publication of a market study notice. This notice publicly confirms the CMA's intention to carry out a market study, describes the market being studied, and invites stakeholders to make representations, including on whether the CMA should make a market investigation reference. Market investigations are a more detailed examination of a market, and we will cover these in a moment. During the first months of a market study, we will focus on obtaining evidence to test the theories of harm developed in the scoping phase and to deepen our understanding of the market. The information gathering stage often involves seeking written representations to a statement of scope, which is published on the CMA's website shortly after the start of a study. The statement of scope sets out the scope of the study and issues under consideration. As part of the information gathering stage, we will also issue questionnaires, conduct surveys, hold meetings with stakeholders, and utilise existing research into a market. The CMA may use its compulsory information gathering powers in a market study, which is particularly important given the statutory deadline that it must work to. Based on the analysis of the information it has gathered, the CMA must decide no later than 6 months after the start of the market study whether to make a market investigation reference, and must publicly consult on this if it decides to do so. Irrespective of its decision, the CMA generally publishes an interim report, which is usually published at the 6-month mark, in which it will seek views on its interim findings and set out early stage thinking on any potential remedial measures it considers may be necessary. Following the interim report, the team will conduct further analysis and review any responses to the report from stakeholders and discuss with stakeholders the possible remedies to any problems the CMA has provisionally found. These developments build up to informing the final report, which determines whether further investigation into a market is appropriate or what recommendations should be made to improve the market. There are several potential outcomes from a market study, including a clean bill of health, recommended actions which improve the quality and accessibility of information to consumers, encouraging businesses in the market to self-regulate, making recommendations to government to change regulations or public policy, taking competition or consumer enforcement action, and making a market investigation reference or accepting undertakings in lieu of a reference.
Should we, or a sector regulator with concurrent competition powers, have reasonable grounds for suspecting that any feature or combination of features in a market for goods or services prevents, restricts, or distorts competition, we can make a reference for an in-depth market investigation. Market investigations are detailed examinations into whether a feature or combination of features of a market has an adverse effect on competition. The CMA must produce its final report into a market investigation by 18 months after the date of the reference, although a 6-month extension is possible. In a market investigation, information is gathered by means of formal hearings, compulsory and voluntary information requests, consultations, site visits, and extensive engagement with a wide range of parties. An inquiry group is formed to assess the information presented in the investigation and concludes whether an adverse effect on competition is found. The inquiry group is a collection of 4 to 5 individuals independent from the CMA, with expertise in a variety of fields such as law, economics, and finance. The inquiry group is supported by a staff team typically comprising delivery, economic, legal, and financial specialists. If the CMA determines that there is an issue in the market that is causing an adverse effect on competition, it must decide what remedial action, if any, is appropriate. As with the market study, there are a variety of potential outcomes for an investigation, and the CMA has order-making powers which may allow it to require businesses to divest certain assets, implement price controls on the market, or produce additional transparency measures such as price lists.
If the CMA decides to take action to remedy a competition issue, it has a choice of accepting undertakings from relevant parties and/or making a legally enforceable order. In practice, the CMA may decide to take several actions itself or make recommendations to others in a package of measures. When determining what remedies to implement following a market investigation, the CMA must provide a remedy that is as comprehensive a solution as is reasonable and practical. This is achieved by considering 3 criteria: effectiveness, proportionality, and relevant customer benefits. The CMA's Remedies Business and Financial Analysis team, or RBFA team, will assess the most suitable remedies for the competition issues regarding these criteria. Remedies may take several forms, including structural remedies that require businesses to divest assets or businesses, behavioural remedies that involve businesses committing to certain actions, like giving customers more information when making purchases, and remedies that control the harmful effects of the competition issues, such as introducing price caps. A combination of structural and behavioural remedies might be necessary, and these may be implemented through orders or undertakings. The CMA has a 6-month window to finalise any proposed orders or undertakings, agree any undertakings with parties, or consult with parties regarding any orders, then finally publish them. In the event of a formal recommendation to government resulting from a market investigation, the government has committed to providing a response within 90 days. Once the CMA has put in place a remedy, it has an ongoing role to assess compliance with that remedy. Monitoring of remedies may require the CMA to engage with specific stakeholders and request that they provide information on their compliance with the remedies or on market activity. The CMA may also coordinate with sector regulators to oversee the monitoring process. When non-compliance is detected by the CMA or a sector regulator, the CMA may take several approaches to rectify this behaviour. Communicating with the non-compliant party to encourage voluntary compliance with the remedy, issuing directions for serious or persistent non-compliance, and or seeking court injunctions to enforce the remedies.
Decisions taken by the CMA when using its powers through its markets tools can be subject to judicial review. This means that any person aggrieved by a CMA decision relating to a market investigation reference can challenge that decision to the Competition Appeal Tribunal, a specialist legal body responsible for hearing and deciding on cases relating to competition and economic regulatory issues. Any such appeal must be brought before the CAT within 2 months of the CMA's decision. Broadly, the CMA's decisions can be subject to review on 4 grounds: illegality, irrationality, procedural impropriety, and proportionality. There have been previous challenges to decisions relating to market investigations, and these have typically been in response to the proportionality of far-reaching and impactful market remedies imposed by the CMA and its predecessors. For example, in 2008, when the conclusions of a Competition Commission investigation into the grocery market required competition tests to be added to supermarket planning applications. And in 2012, when the Competition Commission required the British Airport Authority to divest its ownership of Gatwick, Stansted and Edinburgh Airport.
In this section, we're going to look at 3 CMA case studies that highlight how we apply both the prioritization principles and our framework for market studies, the CMA's electric vehicle charging market study and the online platform and digital advertising study. We're also going to consider our funerals market investigation, which followed a CMA market study into the funerals sector. Sustainability is becoming a leading agenda point for governments across the world, and the UK government has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 28% by 2035, moving to net zero by 2050, including through banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, given transport, in particular cars, is the largest source of emissions in the UK. The electric vehicle or EV charging sector is a nascent but critically important sector in helping to achieve net zero, and one in which the CMA recently examined as part of its priority focus on supporting the transition to a low carbon economy in the UK. The CMA's market study into EV charging looked at this critical new sector across the UK and examined how it is developing and whether the sector, left to its own devices, can deliver what is needed. We considered 2 main themes. First, whether the sector can deliver the scale and pace of investment that's needed in a way that also means it's competitive, and what needs to be put in place to enable this to happen. Second, we looked at how people interact with this new and potentially very complex sector and any problems they may face, and what measures may be needed to ensure that charging is easy and convenient. The CMA study found that good progress has been made in some parts of the sector in the rollout of charge points, such as charging at destinations like supermarkets or shopping centres, and charging at home in a private driveway, garage or at work. However, we identified several issues with the availability of charge points in other parts of the sectors where the charging network is lagging behind, such as charging along motorways, in rural areas or on street along the curbside. We also found there's a lot of variation across the UK, with access to charging being a postcode lottery depending on where you live. The CMA made several recommendations to governments for targeted interventions to kickstart investment and unlock competition, some of which you can see on screen now. There are also other problems for EV drivers which can make EV charging challenging. For example, it can be difficult and frustrating to find and access working charge points, and to compare costs and pay for charging. We therefore also set out measures to ensure that EV charging is simple and positive experience for people, to create a sector that people can trust and have confidence in, both now and in the future, for the successful take-up of EVs. Recommending that as part of its work in the sector, the UK government takes into account 4 key principles and tasks a public body with implementing, overseeing and monitoring these as the sector develops. This will ensure drivers have a positive charging experience.
Alongside supporting the transition to a low-carbon economy, the CMA's annual plan commits to protect the interests of vulnerable consumers. In June 2018, the CMA launched a market study into the funerals market in the UK. At the end of the market study, given the concerns we identified about the market, we made a reference for an in-depth market investigation. Our investigation centred on how people approach the purchase of a funeral under the extremely difficult circumstances that precede and follow the death of a loved one, and on competition between funeral directors and between crematorium operators. The later stages of the CMA's investigation coincided with the coronavirus pandemic, adding further relevance to the discussion around this market. A key finding was that most consumers find it extremely difficult to engage in the process of purchasing a funeral, not just because of their emotional vulnerability, but because of other factors that affect their ability to exercise choice as they would normally do when faced with such an important purchase. These include social pressures and seeking to do the right thing for the deceased, pressure to make decisions quickly, and lack of practical experience of what organising a funeral entails. In those circumstances, we found that they largely followed personal recommendations or went back to a funeral director they had previously used, rather than making proactive and informed choices based on quality or price. Compounding this, we found a lack of transparency in funeral directors and crematoria operators' prices. Considering this, it's not surprising that a lack of competition between funeral directors had resulted in higher prices than we would expect to see in a well-functioning market. With average annual rates of increase of 5% over 13 years for funeral directors. For crematoria, where there are high levels of concentrations, rates had increased 6% over 10 years. In both cases, this was well in excess of general inflation. Funeral directors and crematoria had also been making excessive profits. Finally, we found that some funeral directors were not providing acceptable levels of quality, which is deeply detrimental to customers who expect their loved ones to be treated with respect and dignity. Unlike market studies, at the end of a market investigation, the CMA can directly impose measures on parties. However, the pandemic severely restricted our ability to fully develop all the remedies we might otherwise have pursued, such as price controls, although the CMA may return to consider this issue in the future. In the meantime, we have implemented a set of remedies by means of a legally enforceable order. These include requirements on funeral directors to provide price information to consumers in a clear and standardised manner, and for crematoria to provide specified price information. Prohibiting certain arrangements that could channel vulnerable customers to a funeral director that may not fully meet their needs, such as payments to care homes to incentivise referrals. And requiring certain funeral directors and all crematoria operators to provide the CMA with specified revenue and volume information on a regular basis, and to send in annual compliance statements to the CMA. The CMA also made recommendations to government to regulate quality in the sector. In response, the UK government has committed to working with the sector to ensure effective co-regulation, developing a set of standards for funeral directors and evaluating the effectiveness of this.
The CMA has made fostering competition in digital markets a key priority, and the growth of online platforms is one reason why the CMA has chosen to focus extensively in this area. UK consumers spend 3 hours a day on the internet, and over a third of this time is on sites owned by Google or Facebook. As consumer usage has grown in these platforms, so too has the value of advertising on them, with Google and Facebook becoming most prominent. Therefore, the CMA's online platforms and digital advertising market study sought to examine competition in this space. The study found that Google holds over 90% of UK online search ad market and was attaining on average 30 to 40% higher prices for its advertising space compared to nearest rival Bing. Facebook-owned platforms accounted for 75% of all time spent on social media platforms in the UK, with its revenue per user increasing by over 10 times between 2011 and 2019. With Google and Facebook having market power in general search and social media respectively, the costs associated with advertising on these platforms might lead to increased prices for consumers. For example, a travel website which relies heavily on receiving traffic from search engines may invest heavily in search advertising. In this case, higher advertising prices may feed through to higher prices for flights or hotel rooms for customers. The three key questions for the CMA in the study were: to what extent do online platforms hold market power in web search and social media? Do consumers have adequate control over the use of their data by online platforms? And does market power of online platforms distort competition in digital markets? The CMA concluded that Google and Facebook hold significant market power in consumer-facing markets. The size of each platform's user base carries with it substantial network effects. That makes Facebook a must-have network for its users to stay in contact with one another, and enables Google to develop its search service in a way that advantages it over rival search engines. Through several expansions and acquisitions, both companies have developed strong, interconnected ecosystems of complementary products and services, creating advantageous efficiencies, as well as making it harder for potential rivals to compete with their core services. The size of their user bases also means that they have unparalleled access to user data, giving them a distinct advantage in targeted advertising. On data collection practices, we found that both platforms either use default settings which nudge people towards their other services and encouraging users to give up their data, or in some cases restrict users' choices. For example, Google paying to be the default search engine on browsers and mobile devices, or Facebook denying users the ability to turn off personalized advertising when using their services. In the face of this significant market power, the CMA highlighted several potential harms to consumers due to a lack of competition. A reduction in innovation that could challenge the dominance of Google and Facebook, increased costs for consumers in purchasing goods and services online due to higher advertising costs for advertisers of these goods and services, and a reduction in ability for newspapers and other publishers to produce quality content due to their revenue shares being squeezed by larger platforms. And so, the CMA concluded that a new pro-competition regulatory regime is necessary to unlock greater competition in digital markets and to govern the behaviour of the most powerful digital firms such as Google and Facebook. The CMA agreed with previous proposals from an independent review that the new regime should be overseen by a new Digital Markets Unit, which was subsequently formed in mid-2021.
Thank you for taking the time to watch our segment describing the CMA's market tools. When using these tools, we seek to drive benefits to consumers and markets identified as key priorities for the CMA and the wider economy. We've outlined what's involved in the markets regime, set out how our interventions aim to help and protect consumers, and finally, how we aim to make markets work
Hello,
for
I'm Guilherme
consumers,
Rezende,
businesses, and the economy.
the Chief
We will now
Economist
turn
at
to our
CADE,
colleagues from
the
other
Brazilian
authorities to give an
Antitrust
overview of how markets
Authority.
tools are applied
In
our
this video, I'm
jurisdictions.
going to presenting our experience in producing market studies that are research that allow antitrust authorities to examine competition concern in specific markets or industries outside the context of merger reviews and antitrust investigations. They are in-depth research into a specific market or aspect of the market, its regulation, its structure, the relationship between players, and so on, to acquire knowledge, identify potential threats to competition, or both. Market studies usually become reports that spread information to an internal or external audience, recommendations to market players about a potentially anti-competitive practice, and suggestions about legislations and regulations. In choosing a topic or market to examine, CADE considers its priorities and requests from other bodies. The studies can aim to analyze emerging competition topics or consolidate and disseminate knowledge about competition matters. So let me explain a little bit these two possibilities. First, analyze emerging competition topics. That is, how can changes in the economy can affect competition environment and condition in distinct markets. These changes can be caused by the introduction of disruptive technologies and business models in the market. For example, CADE conducted market studies on the effects of ride-hailing apps had on the Brazilian market and how this digital economy affect competition analysis. Emerging competition topics also arise from laws and regulations designed to control a specific sector. As examples, we can cite studies that support the authorities' analysis of cost of shipping bills and assessments of changes made to premium television regulations. Second point, the studies also can consolidate and disseminate knowledge about competition matters. In this sense, the analysis address some markets that are relevant to CADE, whether because they related to significant case or because the number of measures and uncompetitive practices associated with them. CADE has produced a total of 15 studies for its review of CADE's decision series. The series includes publications covering the most relevant aspects of each market, such as its economic statistics, infrastructure, regulation, and so on, along with CADE decisions in cases related to that market and the authorities' consolidated positions. There are publications dedicated to many sectors such as fuels, private health insurance, higher education, port service, air transportation, agricultural inputs, and digital platform-based markets. The time and resources available are fundamental for determining a study's depth and scope. A longer time frame allows for quantitative studies or broader, in-depth analysis that includes discussions with other public bodies and stakeholders. Some cases, however, call for a prompter response, as in the case when the authority is required to analyze a proposed law or regulation. In these situations, CADE usually has little time to give a statement. Besides the information the database is available, another crucial resource for preparing market studies are the researchers, who may be part of CADE staff or external consultant. Again, the more the resources, the broader and more detailed the study can be. The deadline also affects the resources. Medium to long-term deadlines make it easier for the authority to hire external consultants and obtain information and data from market players, especially confidential information. In 2020, CADE's Department of Economic Studies added a new unit for carrying out competition advocacy actions and market studies. Finally, CADE experience shows that interventions and recommendations resulting from market studies are more effective when covered by the press, discussed by the academy, and debated with other government bodies and legislative branch. In light of this, CADE is always willing to participate in events to discuss its market studies. Thank you.
Hello, I am Patricia Sanchez Calero, case handler at the European Commission, the Antitrust Unit for Media. In this video, I will be explaining the objectives of sector inquiries, the steps that we normally follow to carry out one based on our most recent experience, the inquiry into the consumer Internet of Things sector, for which we published the final report in January 2022. And I will also provide you with some practical tips that might be useful when doing a similar exercise. So first of all, when does the European Commission decide to carry out a sector inquiry? The Commission may decide to conduct an inquiry into a particular sector of the economy or into a particular type of agreement across various sectors when there are suggestions that competition in these sectors may be restricted or distorted within the internal market. The purpose of a sector inquiry is to achieve a better understanding of a particular sector with a view to giving effect to EU competition rules. Depending on the results of a sector inquiry, the Commission may, at a later stage, assess whether it needs to open specific investigations to ensure that the EU rules on restrictive agreements and abuse of a dominant position are being respected. So, for the Internet of Things sector inquiry, we noticed that In this sector, there were indications of company behavior conducive to structurally distorting competition in and for this sector. Then we decided what specific areas of the Internet of Things sector we wanted to cover. Once we had identified the consumer IoT segments we wanted to address, then we prepared targeted questionnaires for each of these segments. When preparing the questionnaires, it is important to already reflect on the expected input and how to process it in later stages, so that the replies can be meaningful. For example, when asking statistical data in Excel format, think about how to draw aggregated reports so that they can be interpreted in a meaningful way for the drafting of the reports at the later stage. The next step was the selection of the addressees and sending the questionnaires. The questionnaires were sent to a selection of companies active in the consumer Internet of Things sector, covering a variety of products and services and representing different types of companies in terms of size, activities, and range of products offered. In general, to increase the response rate, it may be helpful not to send out the questionnaires through a functional mailbox, to add the questionnaire as an email attachment, not just a link, and to send reminders to those companies that have not acknowledged receipt. After having received the replies to the questionnaires, and before their analysis, it is helpful to take a preliminary look at the replies to identify which companies have not replied to all questions, whether annexes are missing, etc. Because it might be that this is no longer possible at a later stage due to internal timing constraints. It is also important to check if the companies have clearly indicated which information is confidential and request non-confidential versions as needed. Based on the replies to targeted questionnaires, a preliminary report is prepared, where an overview of the main competition-relevant market trends identified is provided. The publication of the preliminary report is then followed by the launching of a public consultation on the preliminary findings of the inquiry. In the Internet of Things sector inquiry, we published the preliminary report in July, and the public consultation ran during the summer. The inputs provided during the public consultation can confirm or not the preliminary findings, but they also provide additional information. In other sector inquiries, such as DigiComp's e-commerce sector inquiry, a stakeholder conference was organized to gather additional input. All inputs are included into a final report and a staff working document. The sector inquiry finalizes with the publication of this final report. Finally, it is important to emphasize that sector inquiries are useful tools not only to help us detect conducts that warrant a follow-up antitrust investigation, but they can also provide useful information that can feed into the Commission's regulatory work. For instance, the information gathered during the sector inquiry into consumer Internet of Things informed regulatory initiatives such as the Digital Markets Act or the Data Act. So thank you very much for your time.
Hello, my name is Heidi Sada, and I am Executive Director of International Affairs of the Mexican Federal Economic Competition Commission. Today, along with my colleagues, we will present you the experience of COFECE regarding the market studies and market investigations conducted by the Commission. Article 12 of Mexico's Federal Economic Competition Law empowers the Commission to conduct various types of advocacy activities, such as the elaboration or order of studies, research projects, and general reports on topics related to market access and competition. Thus, the Commission produces two different types of studies: market studies conducted by the General Directorate of Economic Studies, and sectoral advocacy studies or papers conducted by the General Directorate of Competition Advocacy. This in coordination with other substantive areas of the Commission. In the following sections of this video, we will hear from Juan Manuel Espino, General Director of Economic Studies, more detail on the market studies conducted by COFECE. Then, Maria Jose Contreras, General Director of Competition Advocacy, will further discuss advocacy papers prepared by COFECE. Finally, Juan Francisco Valerio, General Director of Regulated Markets, will talk about Article 94 of the law, which empowers the Commission to conduct market investigations. We hope you enjoy this video.
The Mexican competition law empowers COFECE to conduct several types of advocacy activities, such as market studies. Market studies are used when a market is not working well for the benefit of consumers, but the causes may not be necessarily or solely found in conducts or actions led by an economic agent. Therefore, a thorough analysis of a market from a competition perspective is needed. In this sense, market studies involve a more in-depth quantitative and economic analysis of the competitive dynamics of a market and its possible constraints. When deciding which markets will be analyzed, the Commission focuses on the priority sectors identified in its strategic plan. In its 2018 to 2021 strategic plan, the Commission defined the financial, energy, agri-food, transport, health, and public procurement sectors as a priority. Given the increasing digitalization of the economy, the digital market sector has also been categorized as a priority. The Commission could also decide to conduct a market study in the basis of ex officio research when needed. The knowledge acquired by COFECE in these studies is usually disseminated amongst its different units, which may derive in future enforcement actions, such as an investigation of barriers to competition, anti-competitive conducts, or a merger review, or advocacy initiatives, such as the issuance of a non-binding opinion. Also, these studies could result in the issuance of recommendations directed at regulators, policymakers, legislators, or local governments, aimed at improving the conditions of the markets. Since 2014, COFECE has published 7 market studies on the following sectors: financial, agri-food, expired patent drugs, interurban passenger transportation, the modern channel of retail commerce of food and beverages, and the public service of rail freight transport. For example, this former study identifies obstacles to the efficient operation of this service. After an in-depth analysis of the sector, the Commission concluded that, in one hand, the rail freight transport shows low competition, and, in the other, concessionaires provide their services almost exclusively in their own network, whose consequence is that railway transport operates in a fragmented manner. These conditions cause low efficiency of the service at long distance and affect negatively to the country's competitiveness. As a result of this study, COFECE made 25 recommendations addressed at legislators and regulators to promote greater competition and efficiency in the sector. This is especially important as currently there is a discussion in the Mexican Congress regarding a reform to the Railroad Service Regulatory Law, which represents a great opportunity to incorporate the Commission's recommendations and improve competition in this sector. Overall, COFECE's recommendations are well received and, in some successful cases, implemented by regulators. For example, our study on expired patent drugs identified as a problem a lack of transparency in the linkage system between patent system and sanitary registration, and recommended changes in the regulation to address this issue. Thus, in 2020, a new federal law for the protection of the industrial property was enacted. The new law allows the procedure for sanitary registration of generic drugs to begin immediately after a patent is published and simplify the consultation process between sanitary and industrial property authorities to allow better management of the sanitary registration system. The conduction of market studies is possible thanks to the work of 13 public officials that work in this general direction, who have mainly an economics background and expertise and are also specialists in regulation. This has been just a brief example of COFECE's work in market studies. You can learn more on this matter on the Commission's website. Now, my colleague, María José Contreras, will talk about advocacy studies or papers and how they are different from market studies. Thank you.
Hello, my name is María José Contreras, and I am the Director General of Competition Advocacy at COFECE. I will walk you through a second type of documents, competition advocacy studies. Often, the lack of competition is not only due to anti-competitive behavior of economic agents, but also to regulations that might favor market concentration, protect incumbents, or facilitate violations of the competition law. This is why COFECE constantly monitors and evaluates current regulation and regulatory projects from a competition perspective. Competition advocacy documents consist of a systematic regulatory analysis in a determined sector or economic activity in order to identify possible obstacles to competition and propose recommendations to remove them. The methodology of analysis and the limited scope of these documents allow the Commission to appropriately and promptly react to regulatory amendments that could hurt competition. The measures proposed by COFECE in these documents may include suggestions for liberalization, deregulation, or modification of regulations. These recommendations are not binding. This is why the ultimate responsible of implementing them for the benefits of consumers are regulators. For this reason, COFECE carries out an exhaustive liaison labor with these authorities and other potential stakeholders, for example, the private sector or the legislative branch, as to ensure the discussion and understanding of our recommendations and to maximize the probability of them being implemented. Dissemination among a broader audience of these documents via social networks and media is also important in order to advance the adoption of pro-competitive regulatory reforms. Up to this day, COFECE has published 6 sectorial advocacy studies, 2 on the markets of gasoline and diesel, 1 on the LP gas market, a competition agenda in public procurement, a document about competition in the digital economy, and the most recent one on the role of clean energy certificates in the Mexican electricity industry. The latter evaluates the design and state of implementation of the regulatory framework that emanated from the constitutional reform of 2013 that introduced competition in the electricity industry as a means to motivate efficiency throughout the value chain and the installation of cleaner generation technologies. This document finds, among other things, that Mexico will not comply with the 30% clean energy generation percentage internationally committed by 2024. This is a consequence, first, of the lack of speed in the application of the legal and regulatory framework stipulated to allow for competition in this industry. But mainly, this is a direct result of the recent shift away from competition that took place 3 years ago in this sector, materialized in several regulatory amendments that compromise competitive neutrality in the generation and wholesale of electricity. This document provides a roadmap and several recommendations to restore Mexico's path toward competition, and the transition to cleaner sources of energy. It has also been a useful input for COFECE's subsequent advocacy interventions, such as the recently issued opinion on the constitutional reform in the electricity industry that is now being discussed in Congress. To learn more about COFECE's advocacy documents and other advocacy actions, please visit our website. I now give the floor to my colleague Juan Francisco, who will tell you about another tool that the Commission has to analyze markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Hello, my name is Francisco Valerio, and I'm Director General for Regulated Markets at COFECE. I lead a team of 23 officials in charge of conducting market investigations. In Mexico, market investigations are foreseen in Article 94 of the competition law. This type of investigations may be considered as an enforcement tool that allows two main objectives. The first is to identify and correct restrictions on competition caused both by firms and authorities. The second is to identify essential facilities or inputs controlled by a firm and assure that other firms have access to those inputs. COFECE was endowed with the power to conduct these market investigations by the reforms to the competition constitutional and legal framework back in 2013 and 2014, respectively. This is one of the so-called special procedures foreseen in the competition law. They are a novel and flexible instrument that allows to correct competition problems in a market when the use of other advocacy or traditional enforcement tools is ineffective or infeasible. To perform the inquiry, COFECE may use any tool, such as information requests, individual interrogations, and even downgrades, though the most used tool is, of course, information requests. As I said, one of the objectives of this procedure is to identify restrictions on competition, or as the law calls them, barriers on competition. The law itself provides a flexible definition of what may be considered as a barrier on competition, and it comprises any structural market characteristic or conduct performed by any firm that obstructs competitors' access to the market or that distort competition. Laws and regulations may also be considered as a barrier on competition when they unreasonably impede or distort competition. The competition law also provides guidance as to which products or services may be considered essential inputs or facilities. In Article 60, the law foresees that an input is essential if it is controlled by a firm with market power. No unreasonable alternatives are available, and the duplication of the input is not feasible due to legal, economic, or technical obstacles. Should the Commission finally conclude that a barrier on competition exists, it may impose a series of corrective measures. The first may be the imposition of behavioral measures which compel firms to act in a specific way or to stop acts that distort competition. The second is the imposition of structural remedies, which allow to modify the structure of any market, including the possibility of asset divestitures. The last one is the issuance of non-binding recommendations to authorities to eliminate regulatory barriers on competition. And regarding essential facilities or inputs, the law enables the Commission to impose regulations to assure access to that input by any other economic agent. Due to these characteristics, these investigations constitute a hybrid competition and regulatory tool with the advantage that it allows to conduct thorough market investigations and to impose appropriate remedies when competition problems are identified. The procedure is established in Article 94 of the competition law is not intended to sanction anti-competitive practices, but rather it is intended for identifying and correcting competition problems through these types of corrective measures. To this day, the Commission has opened and ended 7 market investigations regarding slot allocation in Mexico City's airport, local freight transportations in the state of Sinaloa, which is a region located in northern Mexico. Third, barley production and distribution for beer factories. The fourth is port services for bulk grain in southern Mexico. The fifth is the distribution and transportation of unprocessed milk, also in a northern region of Mexico. The sixth is an investigation regarding norms and standards and its evaluation and assessment. And finally, the most recent one is an investigation into the card payment system. Of these, 3 inquiries were closed by the Commission without finding any competition concerns, which are barley, norms and standards, and port services. And 1 is still pending its final resolution, which is the payment systems investigation. In the cases related to freight transportation and milk, we issued non-binding recommendations to local authorities to eliminate regulatory barriers. In this sense, our experience shows that this tool allows for the conduction of rigorous inquiries that bring light on the elements that may hinder competition and are usually unnoticed in other investigations. Though this is a new tool and much of its potential in Mexico remains to be seen. For example, this tool may be very, very relevant in platform or digital markets, which pose new and complex challenges from a competition perspective. So with this tool, we conclude exploring COFECE's available options to analyze markets. We hope our experience and examples are useful. And if you would like to know more about our work in this field, please feel free to contact us. Thank you very much for your time.